Hi guys, welcome to this video. This video is about the F27 Friendship, soon to be released by Just Flight. Now they've very kindly given me the opportunity to have a look at a pre-release version. I can't do a review on it because obviously it's pre-release and things are potentially going to change between me looking at it and it being for sale. However, what I can certainly do is have a look around what I've got and give you my first impressions, for want of a better way of putting it. Now this is the 100 variant with the Aer Lingus livery. I did do a previous video which was kind of a Steven Spielberg style movie type video. Not my greatest sort of video, not the video that I generally do, but I just thought I'd put something out there, seeing as they were kind enough to let me have a look at it. Now, one of the things I consider when I look at aircraft is that I don't want to be flying something that looks like a bag of Lego bricks run down the motorway and smeared with an accident with a superglue factory. I want something that actually is going to be a pleasant aircraft to look at, to fly, to operate, and to enjoy, because ultimately that's why we do it, is to enjoy it. You'll have to excuse the noise in the background, by the way. That's my daughter's hamster. It's just decided to wake up, which is most delightful of it. So if you hear squeaking, it's nothing to do with the sim. That's hamster, I guarantee you. Now, in terms of the aircraft itself, the proportions are all good. The F-27 is it's not the prettiest airliner on the world. It's also not the ugliest. There are certainly going to be uglier ones out there. But it's very functional. It's a very practical airliner. And it was followed on by its successor, the F-50, the Fokker F-50, which a friend of mine was a captain on, and he thoroughly enjoyed them. But they have a very good reputation as a workhorse airliner. Now there's not many operating in the sort of European stroke North American environment anymore, if any. I don't know of many, certainly, but they are still operational out there. They still do work and they still do ply their trade. Now, one of the reasons it's not working that much in terms of Europe and North America is the noise. These engines are the Rolls-Royce Dart engines. They're one of the most popular turboprop engines ever made, bar none. But fundamentally they're incredibly basic, incredibly reliable, but very, very, very noisy. You've got a two-stage impeller compressor at the front. Then you've got the sort of burner chambers with the igniters. And then towards the back you've got a three-stage turbine for the power turbine. All of that's connected on one shaft, and that shaft goes to a reduction gearbox, and then the reduction gearbox turns the prop. Very basic system. Now, in line with it being basic systems, the propeller has no reverse pitch, so it can go to a flat condition like this, which is between 0 and 20 degrees pitch. It can't go into reverse, so you have no reverse thrust with this thing at all in any way, shape or form, and that's an indicator of the nature of the aircraft. Very basic. It does not have hydraulics. It has a thing called a lever or pulley to connect the pilot to the controls, the primary flight surfaces. What it does have is it has pneumatics, and the pneumatics are used for undercarriage, for operating the flaps, and also for the brakes. So if you ever get a chance to watch one of the very few YouTube videos on the F-27, in the cockpit views, you may hear it going as the brakes are used and the pneumatics can occasionally release pressure. Very nice aircraft to look at externally, really like it. It's my kind of thing. Those of you who've watched my videos on my channel know that my kind of thing is sort of not quirky, but more something with a bit of interest to it, something with a bit that little bit different. So a turboprop like this really does float my boat, and it's going to be important that it lives up to the potential that it has, because it really is the kind of airliner that people like myself really do look forward to flying. Now, as an observation, I'm just looking at the lighting effects on the fuselage. This is FSX legacy. This is not prepared. This is not P3D. It hasn't got any special lighting models. But the lighting over the top of the fuselage here, look, it's really nice. I'm playing with EasyDock, by the way. It's one of my first videos I'm doing with EasyDock. I've had it for about a month, but I never really could get used to it. So I've decided to try and do it to get that sort of more fluid movement around the aircraft, and to enable me to look into places where I would never have looked before. So, you know, I can have a look and see what the interior is like and the reflection and the light surfaces. And it's easier as well to see things like the bitmap textures. Now, this is one of the things where, you know, it looks very nice in terms of the panel lines and whatnot. So, as I say, I can't really delve into the world of review, but what I can say is what's in front of me I personally really quite like. And it's simple things like the control surfaces. As I say, they're not hydraulic, but you can see the control surfaces moving left and right. But you can also see that there's different... let me just turn it a different way. There's different sections to the control surfaces, all of which are moving at different rates in different ratios, and it's more apparent when you look at the ailerons. Now, it does have differential ailerons as an aircraft, so one moves up more than the other one moves down. But you can see the hinge section. This is your aileron. And then beyond that, you've got another hinged section, which is it aids the pilot in terms of managing the control movements, basically because you move the centre of pressure on top of the wing aerofoil. But the aileron can be considered to be its own mini wing within a wing, if that makes sense. And so to help the pilot with the control sensitivities and forces, they often add these things, such as anti-balance tabs or servo tabs, depending on the aircraft and depending on the wing construction. The shape is a really nice shape in terms of an airliner. Now, in effect, the difficulty for a company is translating the real-life aircraft into something that looks convincing and looks good. But all I'm going to say at the moment is, based on what's in front of me, I really like the design and the shape and the layout of the thing. I think it looks fantastic. The light effects shining off the upper surface of the wings look... You know, the whole thing at the moment is looking very promising. And as I say, I can't consider it a review. All I can do is give my opinions of what's in front of me at the moment, and to discuss a little bit about it. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to point out why I'm doing a panning version without the engines running, because the engines, as Rolls-Royce darts, make an awful lot of noise. And I found that when I first videoed this, I did this section with the engines running, and I could barely hear myself. The Rolls-Royce darts have a very high-pitched, shrill scream to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start the thing up, and then we will take it from there. So hopefully you guys will be able to hear now the noise of the engines compared to my voice. But fundamentally, you can hear the tone of the engines. What I'm going to do is a very quick thing for a couple of seconds. Basically, this era of engine, there was a considerable delay between an input in throttle and the response of the engines, which was basically down to a thing called the spool-up time. Now, that was already bad enough with jet engines. Turboprops tended to be less so, but what I want to do is just demonstrate the spool-up time problems that you would face. So if you're looking to make a quick change to speed or a quick change to your glide slope, you might want to change your power settings. So these throttles are idle at the moment. What I'm going to do is I'll count to 3, I'll open them fully, and then we can have a listen and a watch to the response of the engines. So 1, 2, 3, fully open. Still accelerating. Still accelerating. There's your shrill. Now we're at full power. So it took a good 4 seconds or so. Coming off the throttles in 1, 2, 3. They're off. They're all the way off. They've been off for a couple of seconds now. I can still talk and they're still slowing down, still spooling down. The throttles have been idle for quite a while now. And this is one of the things that makes an airliner like this interesting to fly, is the fact that you have to be conscious of the response of the airliner, the engines and everything to do with it. So we'll leave that at that. We'll get out of the noisy bit and into the quiet bit. Right, so here we are in the civilised bit, and what we're going to do is we're going to just talk through a couple of the bits about the inside of the aircraft. Now, it should come to no surprise that there's a normal instrumentation pack here to look at. However, all is not as it appears, and the reason is this. Very cunningly, this altimeter is included, which looks like any other altimeter. Now, it's not some sort of superhero, but it is a devil that has killed many, many, many people. But why would an alternator kill you? Well, it's because it's a notorious 3-pointer altimeter. So this big one is hundreds, this fat one is thousands, and this one is tens of thousands. And there are multitudes of cases where pilots have misread this instrument in terms of what altitude they were at, or the tens of thousands have been hidden by one of the needles, and when they're in cloud they've misinterpreted this instrument which is why later variants, you'll see them in the 737s and so on and so forth, like the 737 300 400s, the classics. You'll see it with the barrels here for the readouts in 35,000 feet or whatever it'll be here. They got rid of this here, and generally what they have now in a modern altimeter is they have the pointer for hundreds, and then they have the digits for the thousands. But fundamentally this was one of the most dangerous instruments of its time, so one worth being aware of. Now I'm not going to go through the whole cockpit, because at the end of the day, a lot of cockpits have a lot of very similar features. However, suffice to say, you've got your alternators here, complete with resplendent with gauges, and things do affect, when you turn off your pitot heaters, you do get impact here. The gauge change here, they change over here as well in terms of the battery monitoring. You've got various lights for electrical statuses, so that's all there. So you've got your alternators, you've got your inverters, you've got your generators, you've got your fuel management panel. One of the things I will say is that's caught me out previously. It's got 3 settings, you can see, so it's got left, right and both. I've flown around with it on left without realising and almost run out of fuel before, so that's worth bearing in mind. The standard sort of avionics pack, nothing too exciting here, but there's a couple of interesting things with this aircraft which I'm going to go over a little bit with you now. The first interesting thing is this little circle up here. So let's just zoom in. This little circular device up here, Rolls-Royce, it's a fuel datum computer. Now, what on earth is a fuel datum computer? Well, one of the things with this aircraft is we will just try and get me and my inept easy dock abilities over here. These things down here are fuel trimmers. Now, when I read an article written by a Jersey European pilot, he said that basically they'd get up to cruise altitude and they'd forget these 2 throttles, the big let's rock throttles, and instead they'd just use these fuel trimmers to adjust the fuel flow to the engines, and that would be adequate control for them to cruise, to enter the descent stage and all sorts and so on. But for takeoff, in effect, these fuel trimmers are used for fine adjustment of the engines, and they're set using the computer up here. This little doofer here, so it does turn, you can set it, and what you have is your prevailing air temperature here, your pressure altitude, and then by combining those two, so say we're at 25 degrees at a pressure altitude of 2,000 feet, turn the two to line up, and then you can set your 7.1 or something like as your fuel datum down here. So nice little gadget, we like that. Good to be included. Here's your electrical panel for your electrical anti-ice. Down here is the pneumatics. I'll point that out in a second. And then you've got a couple of interesting bits here. You've got fuel filter heaters and whatnot, which is all very good. But this panel here, water methanol. What is water methanol? Well, water methanol was a technique which is not. It's still used in some aircraft, and it was even included in certain things like the British Aerospace Harrier has water injection into its engines, for example. But basically what it is that when you're at high altitude, or your air, the density of the air you are flying in, trying to take off in, is at high altitude, you can inject water and methanol into the engine. It changes the density of the air, fools the engine into thinking that it's much lower down, and as a result the engine actually generates more power because you've got more dense air going into it, or going through it I should say. So you can turn these on. On the ground at idle power it does absolutely nothing. If you are near ICAO standard atmosphere, it does absolutely nothing. If you're at high altitude and you're nowhere near ICAO standard atmosphere, and your air density is quite low, which is basically the same thing as saying you're at high density altitude, then this can be used to generate more power ready for your takeoff, to avoid you becoming a horrible mess on the far end of the runway because you didn't get off in time. Down here, I did mention the aircraft has pneumatics instead of hydraulics. Here's your pneumatic control panels with your cabin pressure and your various pneumatics gauges left and right, air pressure. So as a result of it, you can control it all down here. You can see you've got your air boot anti-ice, which you can change here, and you can see the gauges respond in terms of what's going on with the movement of air around the system. So you know, the pneumatics are simulated as well. So you've got some natty features which you won't find on other aircraft simulated here, in terms of the functioning of things like the water methanol and you know, interesting things that make this the kind of aircraft that I enjoy flying. Autopilot is very, 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 very basic. If it was any more basic, it would struggle to be called an autopilot, but that's what we had in the days that this was flying. The final couple of things up here is an interesting panel. This is in relation to the prop locks. The propellers have pitch locks. They have two. They have a flight pitch lock, which basically means that flight fine pitch, which basically means the propellers are locked that they cannot go less than 20 degrees of pitch. Below that is on the ground. Above that you have to be in the air. If you're in the air, sorry, you have to have more than 20 degrees pitch on the blades at all times. And then the next step up is there's a 38 degree flight safety pitch, which basically if you're flying quickly forwards, in the event of any problems with the engines, the last thing you want them to do is to go below 38 degrees for whatever reason in an uncontrolled fashion. And that's simulated up here, and it is actually simulated as well, which is quite impressive. I do like that fact. There's no reverse pitch on this, there's no reverse thrust at all, so what you actually do is on the ground your pitch range can go down below 20. So as a result of that you get a very flat disking effect on the propellers. I can't really see it here, but you get a very flat disking effect, and that works almost as you know, as good as a barn door really. So what we're going to do is we're going to get airborne. I'm going to stop faffing around. I've preset it with the ILS for East Midlands. Got no idea what the wind is, no idea what the weather is, but we'll get airborne nonetheless. Stick a couple of stages of flap down, stand the throttles up, wait for the engines to respond. This is one of the reasons why we get into this habit of stand the throttles up, see them respond, and then we can go to our takeoff power. This scenery, by the way, is UK 2000's East Midlands Airport. Very nice. I do like the UK 2000 stuff, I have to admit. A bit of a wind from the right by the looks of things. 100 knots, rotate. Two indicators of a climb, positive rate gear up. 140 knots, we'll climb at about 160, let the aircraft accelerate a little bit more. Now one of the things I've had, I've been flying with this weather a little bit before. This is one of the weather situations that comes with FTX scenery, where you can just choose the FTX weather. And I've had it a couple of times with this. Now, to be honest, I've found that the wind jumps around occasionally, and it's a bit of a pain. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to level at about 3,000. We're going to fly outbound from East Mids, and once we're outbound, I'm going to talk through a couple of the bits in relation to the autopilot. I'm going to bring the engines back a little bit, be more kind to them. I have thraped the living daylights out of them for the last 30 seconds or so. Now the autopilot is old school autopilot, so basically what it means is that when you engage it, you have to be sympathetic to the autopilot. You have to make sure that it's in a position where when you engage it, you're not giving it a difficult situation to manage. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to get ourselves roughly level at about 3,000 feet, and then we'll engage the autopilot and we'll tell it that that's where we want it to stay. So over here, down we go, autopilot on. Engage the autopilot, altitude hold, and that should then hold us at whatever altitude it was when we selected it. So we must have dropped 50-60 feet, something like that. But let's see what it thinks. Yeah, 2,950 feet. So the other thing that then you need to consider is your lateral navigation. Now you've got two modes, you've got heading and nav, nav and heading, heading and nav, nav and heading. And then you've got the rest of the controls. So in heading mode, it literally does exactly that. It does what it says on the tin. It keeps you going in the heading that you are pointing. If you want to change the heading, what you can do is press the alter heading button here, and then you can turn that to the right. And what then happens is your aircraft will turn to the right. When you release it, it stops turning. Now obviously it takes a certain amount of time for it to come out of the turn. So what we'll do here is we'll put ourselves to about 20 degrees to the right, something like that, and we'll release it. And then what you'll see is if we look up towards the instruments and the horizon again, the aircraft's levelling again at the heading we were looking at. So there we go. Let's set course round to about 269, something like that. I can't remember what the ILS inbound course for East Mids is, but there we go. So there we go. That's so that's the first thing with the autopilot. Now in terms of vertical navigation, you've got speed, hold or altitude hold, which is there. You've got the ability to do an approach, which is this specific button here, and then you've got what's called beam hold. Beam hold confused the heck out of me to start with. Beam hold is basically following either a VOR or ILS course. So it won't track to an NDB or an ADF. It literally has to go to some sort of specific course. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to turn left to parallel the ILS for a second. In fact, what we'll do, let's zoom out a bit. By the way, there's very few indications as to what the autopilot's doing. There's a little green light down here, tells you it's on, and there's also a little alt flag comes up here telling you that you're flying a specific altitude and that it's captured an altitude. It doesn't tell you what the altitude is, which is obviously very helpful. That's nothing to do with just flight, that is just the way the real aircraft is. They make the assumption that the pilots know what they're on about. Anyway, we'll come all the way around and we're going to do what we said we had to do on the tin, which is to give the autopilot a fighting chance of what it's doing. Now the fighting chance with this is going to be to intercept the ILS. So we need to put it into a position whereby it can intercept the ILS. It won't do it from here. It hasn't got a hope in hell of doing it from here. And it's simple things like you need to have a reasonable intercept angle. Now this is all, if you like, common sense. But if you're used to some of the Microsoft Flight Sim autopilots of, you know, default aircraft or even some of the more advanced aircraft, it's difficult to forget that the aircraft doesn't necessarily know exactly where it is in 3 points of space with this. It hasn't got inertial navigation, it hasn't got GPS or anything like that. Now when I read an article about it for a Jersey European guy, they'd just fitted a Trimble 2000 GPS because it made them RNAV compliant, but this aircraft is not RNAV compliant. Now obviously there's nothing to stop you using the default GPS, I assume. I don't know if you can link it into this at the moment. That's just something that I don't know. There's a little trick, by the way, in terms of the localizer. I shall show you if I get a chance as we come through. Yeah, we're not going to get a chance. We're going to have to bust through it and come in from the other side, which is a bit of a shame. We're 14 miles away at 3,000 feet. Take a bit of the power off as well. Help us slow down a bit. So we'll set ourselves there. Then what we can do is we can take that off, put that onto nav, and then it should track it. And it is. Lovely. Okay, so now what we're waiting for is the glide slope to come in. Now, what you can't see is there's two needles. So there's the big white one, which is the coarse one. That's what I dial up. And then there's a second one, which is a little white one, which is under here. And it follows the same route as this yellow one. Now, if the little white one's over here, that's where it's pointing to the beacon, it's saying it's over here. And the difference between these two needle positions tells you how close you are to the actual track that you want. So in this case they're overlying, so we must be really close to it. But if there's a big difference between where the actual beacon is, i.e. where the little needle points, and your intended course, you know how to make an adjustment as a result of that. So there we go. So now all we're doing is we're waiting for the speed to come down nicely, so we're now waiting for the glide slope to become active. At which point I can then use my cunning system of levers and pulleys, also known as controls, to try and influence where we hit the ground. So as I say at the moment, here we go, the weather's decided it's going to do its silly jumpy roundy thing again. That's nothing to do with this aircraft, I hasten to add, it's just the weather setup as it is. So 3,000 feet, if you ever wonder about things in terms of aviation, they all say bad things come in threes, but in aviation virtually everything comes in threes. So you will tend to find that on a 3-degree glide slope, at 3 miles, it's 300 feet per mile. So with this in mind, for I can't see what miles we're coming down to here, but you just multiply it by 3 to get your hundreds of feet you should be at. So my eyes aren't good enough for this sort of nonsense. Where are we? 8. So 3 8's 24, 2,400 feet we would expect to be at. glide slopes coming down. Bearing in mind, that's AGL. That's not because we were at. So what we want to do now is get rid of the altitude hold, put that on, and it should then follow that. Altitude flag's gone. So it's 300 feet for a glide slope per mile. 7 miles means we're 2,100 feet above the touchdown zone, TDZ. Now obviously what you've got to bear in mind is that that then has an elevation above sea level. So that's why we're at 2,900 feet. Here we go, it's starting to think about what to do with the glide slope now. Watching for the VSI, and it's decided yes, it's going to take the glide slope. Okay, so a couple of things about the autopilot. The autopilot does not have any links to the rudder at all. It's not auto rudder, it's pilot rudder. We'll put the gear down, a couple of stages of flaps. In reality, the autopilot on this thing, you would not use it below 3,000 feet. Generally speaking, having read the article from the Jersey European guy, their airline always flew hand-flown approaches below 3,000 feet. Such was the lack of trust in the autopilot, and in fact in the real thing, you had things like this. Autopilot operation. One pilot must be strapped into his seat. Autopilot should be used above VNO, as in normal operating speed. So basically what they're saying is they don't trust it. They never have, they never will, and in the meantime, you're a brave person if you trust it. So in terms of the autopilot operation, to me it's really good. I like it. I like the style of it. Took a bit of getting used to in terms of what each thing did. Unfamiliar terminology, for example the use of the word beam. Normally beam would be associated with the ILS in terms of localizer and glide slope beams. But in this aircraft it applies to VOR navigation as well. So if you're using VORs, then beam is the word you're looking for. And it's just a case of getting used to it and not expecting ridiculous things from it. I mean, in order to get it to engage, you actually want to try and get it somewhere in the vicinity of the performance you want it to demonstrate. So, for example, there's no point being at 4,000 feet a minute rate of climb, passing 4,000 feet and just pressing the button and expecting it to go like it's on rails at 4,000 feet. It just won't do it. But that is one of the accuracies in relation to the aircraft. That wind is awful. Speed's jumping around by 10 knots. I'm not happy with that at all. So, you know, the cockpit is a really good working environment, and I know they've done work with the autopilot because of the fact that they want to get that as good as they can. And the autopilot for me is great. I mean, I've got to be careful, as I say, I don't err onto the side of a review. The short end of it for me is that I was looking forward to this aircraft for quite some time, and I think as something for me to enjoy and to fly around in, I've been flying it around quite a bit for the last week, not because of any other obligation other than the fact that I actually really just enjoy flying it, and I can't wait to see what the resultant final product is, because in my opinion, let's get the autopilot out, in my opinion it's really something that it floats my boat. You know, it's the kind of aircraft, the kind of era, the kind of operations that I like to do. You know, there's no bells and whistles. I haven't got to sit there for 3 hours learning how to program an FMS. You know, it's literally just seat of the pants flying. You get in the aircraft, you fire everything up. It does not take long to get this thing started. You haven't got a list of 4 million different you know, checklist items to go through. Literally, its checklist items consist of basically saying, do the engines start? Yes. Do all the lights go out? Yes. Right, let's fly. And that's the joy of something like this for me, is really being able to just have the pleasure of flying. Does it do that for me? This, I've got to say, I'm really looking forward to having the final version. Obviously, not forgetting there's no reverse pitch here, so it's literally let the props disc, stand on the brakes and bring the speed right down. So where does that leave me? That leaves me with the fact that I'm really looking forward to seeing how the final version turns out. They've introduced some really good stuff that makes it an interesting aircraft to fly, particularly the autopilot. The autopilot needs the pilot to manage it. It needs you to have an understanding of how to use it. It's not the most straightforward thing on earth, but it's very rewarding to be able to fly using that. And it's back to basics, old school navigation with VORs and ADFs, understanding the principles of that navigation and being able to do it. It's not hard stuff, but it's much more rewarding, in my personal opinion, than plugging a few numbers into a little box and then sitting back watching it do its own thing. This is very much an involving aircraft. I like what I see so far, and at the moment I'm just waiting till the final version is available to see what happens with that. Hopefully you guys found the video useful. If you do, then please don't forget to click like, subscribe or share. You know, there's a few little things that just show it as brilliant. You can click to emergency oxygen, turn it to 100%, and then you get a blinker here which shows the oxygen flow is working. Nose wheel steering, if you want it there. You know, there's lots of lovely little things for this. So for me, at the moment, this is an aircraft I enjoy flying. You know, I've flown it quite a lot over the last week. I really enjoy the experience of flying this. Partly because it's my kind of flying, partly because I think it's just something that grabs me. But I think overall, you can see the brake pressure gauge is going on down here. Look at this. I could almost make them dance. Look. I'm excitedly anticipating the release of this thing. So hopefully, as I say, you guys found the video useful, and I shall speak to you soon. Take care.